Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's program shines a light on the Ukrainian refugee crisis and resettlement efforts. A special thanks. The San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefings are supported by a grant from MetaFund. Thank you. The important ongoing work of the San Francisco Interfaith Council would not be possible without generous funding from congregations, corporations, faith-based social service agencies, foundations, judicatories, and supporters like you. Help us spread the word. Visit sfinterfaithcouncil.org to learn about SFIC programming and how to become a supporter. Follow SFIC on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe to SFIC's YouTube channel to watch all of our virtual events. A bit of housekeeping. Today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. Questions will be forwarded to the presenter for their review following the program. To activate closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. As COVID cases climb, now is the ideal time for San Franciscans to prepare for changes in the virus by taking basic actions that can protect themselves, their families, and community. The San Francisco Department of Public Health urges people to be ready for COVID by staying up to date on your vaccinations, knowing how to reach your doctor, especially if you are at high risk for severe illness, keeping a supply of rapid COVID tests, keeping masks handy, planning ahead for a possible infection, and staying informed with trusted sources of information such as sf.gov/COVID. With the changes in federal, state, and city masking guidelines, it can be difficult to know when to mask. The best advice is to bring a mask with you everywhere as you go, as you may be required by the organization, business, or transportation agency to wear one. And many people are still wearing masks for their health choices. Thank you for respecting everyone's choices. The vaccines are safe and effective. Go to sf.gov to find a vaccine site or vaccine event in your neighborhood. Now is the time to come together, San Francisco. Together we can stop Asian discrimination, bias, hate, and violence. The COVID-19 virus has no race or nationality. It is simply a disease. To report a hate crime, call the SFPD at 415-553-1133. And at this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Once again, good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this week's online briefing for faith leaders. Among the heartbreaking collateral damage of Vladimir Putin's unconscionable war in Ukraine is the displacement of countless innocent Ukrainians, the overwhelming number being women and children. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council, will feature a presentation by leaders in the Ukrainian Refugee Resettlement effort from International Rescue Committee, the Jewish Federations of North America, and Jewish Family and Children's Services. Their presentations will encompass a discussion of the Ukrainian refugee crisis, the critical work taking place, and what the future may hold. The presenters will share information concerning what refugees fleeing Ukraine are experiencing, ongoing humanitarian aid efforts, current options for refugees to navigate their way to the United States, and local and community support that will be increasingly needed. Potential areas for advocacy and direct action will also be discussed. And without further ado, we welcome the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Nancy Nielsen, who will offer a brief welcome, as well as the interfaith statement read at the beginning of each of our programs. Nancy, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Good morning to everyone. Thank you all for being here. In these difficult, challenging times, it is reminder once again of how important it is to continue to have dialogue for everyone. At the beginning of every gathering of SFIC, we read this statement to remind ourselves of who we are. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Thank you for being here. And Michael?
Thank you, Nancy. We are very blessed to have with us today the Executive Director of Jewish Family and Children's Services for the San Francisco Bay Area, Dr. Anita Friedman. I have had the privilege of knowing and working with Dr. Friedman past many years, and also to travel to Israel with her and to hear her compelling family story as one who is from a family of Holocaust survivors. Anita, thank you for being with us, and thank you for what your agency is doing. And I thought it only appropriate that you should ground us in this reflective moment today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always an honor to be with this group, with all of you. You're a group of people who have devoted your lives to moving this imperfect world ever so slowly in a better direction. I can't think of a more important group to be working with on issues of common concern. And I want to thank you, Michael, for stitching us all together and your team. There's nothing more important than us coming together in common cause in this way. I was especially moved that you asked me to speak about the situation with Ukraine, because I think you know that I have a very deep personal history with that part of the world. Many of us do, but even if you don't, it's very compelling, very moving, very heartbreaking, and full of pain to watch what's unfolding. It brings back memories of the war, any war that anybody has experienced, especially in Europe. You see crying children, you see a people pleading with the world for help. You see women and children basically alone in the world, looking for help, running to the borders. I was just there. It's mostly women and children who really want to go home, because that's where their home is, and that's where their husbands are, their brothers are, their fathers are, their friends are. It's a very, very painful, difficult situation. And I also feel that we should be aware of the fact, and I think many of us are, that part of the world and our relationship with that part of the world is full of historical ironies. The Ukraine at one point has a long and difficult history, and was at one point one of the more conservative countries, basically led by tyrants, very much aligned with the Soviet Union. For centuries before that, a long history of anti-Semitism, which affects the Jewish community. I worked very closely with Father Dubois. Many of you may know, he wrote a book called The Holocaust by Bullets. He's done the research to uncover that 1.5 million Jews and others were murdered by bullets in Ukraine, not in concentration camps. It's now, however, has emerged in recent decades as one of the most democratic, forward-thinking, enlightened countries in the world. And that's a great lesson for us about change, about how change is possible, about how we are the motive force in making change, and how there's always hope and redemption. I'll tell you a brief story, because my mother's from Kharkov, which is currently being bombed. My husband is from Odessa, which is being bombed. My daughter-in-law is from Kiev, which is also obviously in the war. And I have many friends and family who I'm in touch with there. We're all struggling with finding their way in this very, very difficult situation that we find ourselves in. I went back to rededicate the Jewish cemetery there where my family was buried and lived for hundreds of years. It was a very difficult place. My grandparents were basically given over to the Nazis by local Ukrainians. But now, after the war, 70, 80 years later, I created a ceremony for the entire town with a Catholic priest, the major Catholic priest in that town, who reminded us all that things can change and that all of us are made in the image of God. When I spent time in Ukraine and I was on the border and in Ukraine, it reminds me of an expression that my Uncle Solomon used to always say, and I'll say it in Yiddish, because Yiddish was my first language, and Russian. Gehennen und Geneiden können wir beide finden auf der Welt, which means you can find heaven and hell on this earth. Now we know what hell looks like. We've seen it in the struggles and the pain of many peoples around the world, many families, many individuals, and we see it now in this terrible war that's taking place, where the Ukraine finds herself on the fighting front lines of the democratic world. But we also know what heaven looks like, because we see heaven and glimpses of heaven in each of you who've devoted your lives to basically fighting for human rights, fighting for peace, fighting for reconciliation, fighting for all that's good in this world. So I want to remind us that in these difficult times, it's more important than ever for us to come together as we have been. You are all doing God's work in many different ways, but all of us are doing God's work together. It's an honor to be a part of it. It's an inspiration to be a part of it. I think that the people in Ukraine feel the support. There's an extraordinary amount of humanitarian support happening, in addition to the military support that's being given by many countries. But the humanitarian support is so important to them to boost their spirits and make them feel like they're not alone in the world. It's a very painful thing to feel that you're alone in the world, and they don't feel alone in the world. The situation now is different than in previous wars. There are hundreds of organizations providing humanitarian relief, childcare, and shoes, and medicine, and immigration assistance, and all kinds of support that I think is so critical and so different than has happened in previous situations. There's a lot for us to learn from that. So I want to thank you again for all that you're doing. We're going to talk more now about the specifics of how to continue to do God's work in this very important moment. Thank you very much. And Michael, I want to thank you again for inviting me to share my personal reflections at this very painful time.
Anita, I can't thank you enough. You have set the table, and your profound message, I know, will be the foundation for everything else we hear today. I did want to tell you and our presenters that I had the privilege last night of spending some time with Consul General Dmitry Kushnera, the Consul General of Ukraine, to San Francisco. And I told him what we were doing today. He was very, very interested, very supportive. And I believe that he and his staff will be hopping on this call to hear what is said. We have a phenomenal panel here. And I want to say thank you both to Anita and to Gia Danler for helping to choreograph today's panel. We have with us the Northern California Development Director for International Rescue Committee, Michael McNaye. We have the Director of Legal Services and an immigration attorney, Brett Snyder, for Jewish Family and Children's Services. And we have the Managing Director in Public Affairs for Jewish Federations of North America, Darcy Hirsch. I'm going to hand this over to you. I just wanted to say to Michael that previously our council has worked very closely with International Rescue, especially during the Syrian refugee resettlement programs. And so I want to thank you all. And you have the next 20 to 30 minutes is yours. Enlighten us, engage us, ask of us. And so I hand this over to you, Michael. Why don't you lead us off?
Good morning and belated Eid Mubarak to all.
Mm-hmm.
The International Rescue Committee, or IRC, is the world's largest and oldest NGO that provides relief, protection, and resettlement services for refugees around the world. We were founded by refugee Albert Einstein in 1933, and today we offer services in over 35 countries: Afghanistan, Eritrea, Syria, Myanmar, Venezuela, and now Ukraine. IRC's work follows what we call the arc of a crisis. The first part of the arc happens in the country with the ongoing war or violent conflict. IRC has staff working on the ground in these war-torn areas. For example, we still have about 1,700 local staff working in Afghanistan, and we are now growing our staff in Poland and Ukraine. When a crisis breaks out, the IRC ensures that it responds to it within 72 hours. So the IRC was on the ground in Ukraine by mid-February of this year. The second part of the crisis happens when the refugees are in transit. When Afghanistan fell in August last year, 70,000 displaced individuals landed in countries such as Doha, Qatar, Albania, or Germany before flying to the destination country in Europe or the United States. But this was a special case. Most refugees stay in a transit country for months, even years. For the Ukraine crisis, we see a mobilization of civil society and resources in Poland, where over 3 million people have fled. The world has never seen this scale since World War II. And the IRC has been on the ground in Poland since early February, identifying the humanitarian needs of those who have fled Ukraine with local organizations who are best placed to meet them. So in Ukraine, the IRC is working with local partners across the country to provide emergency assistance to internally displaced people. In Ukraine, the IRC works with our partners on evacuation efforts for women and children. We provide information about registration for people, for displaced people, housing, employment, and refugee rights. We also provide financial support, access to essentials such as groceries, blankets, warm clothes, electrical appliances, and stoves. In Poland, the IRC is working with partners to provide psychological and legal support, cultural assistance, and translation services. We provide medical equipment for health teams operating at border crossing points and refugee reception centers. So the IRC has been responding to humanitarian crises in Europe since 2015, where we launched an emergency response to the peak in migration in Greece and relaunched operations in Serbia. Now the IRC supports refugees and migrants in Germany, Italy, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the UK, offering a whole set of interventions. As of this week, May 2, over 5.5 million refugees have fled from Ukraine into neighboring countries. Before, in February 24, there were already about 854,000 internally displaced within Ukraine. This number is now 7.1 million. And as of April 25, there have been 5,840 civilian casualties. In less than 6 weeks, the civilian deaths from the last 7 years of armed conflict in eastern Ukraine, which was 1,300 civilians killed. It was just nothing compared to the 2,000 within 6 weeks. At this point, I should note that other crises around the world should not be neglected as attention shifts to the current crisis in Ukraine. There have been rightly a global outpouring of support of people fleeing Ukraine, but IRC still calls for equal empathy to be shown for refugees and displaced people in many other crises around the world: Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Syria. The international community must continue to provide life-saving funding for these crises and advocate for the end of conflicts that contribute to them. So the third part of the arc happens when the displaced individuals land in the destination country, such as the United States. The IRC welcomes the Biden administration's commitment to welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees with the Uniting for Ukraine effort that creates a streamlined process for Ukrainians with US-based sponsors to enter the US. At this point, I'll just briefly touch on the three main client categories of the IRC, which could be the main pathways for Ukrainians resettling in the United States. Refugees are individuals forced to leave their countries due to fear of persecution and are granted refugee status before arrival in the US. So this is administered through the US Refugee Admissions Program. Asylees are those who have been granted protection status once in the US. once they've arrived. So the IRC serves asylees from a range of countries, including El Salvador, Mexico, and Haiti. A third category is through the Temporary Protective Status Program, or TPS, and my colleague Brett Snyder will expound on this. But at this point, I'll say that the TPS was established by Congress in 1990 to protect foreign nationals residing in the US from deportation when conditions in their home countries make it them unsafe for return. The IRC is the largest refugee resettlement agency in the United States. The IRC is contracted by the International Office of Migration, the State Department, and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The IRC in Northern California is one of 25 IRC resettlement communities in the country, from Tallahassee to Spokane, from Baltimore to Boise. Here in Northern California, the IRC provides services for refugees and immigrants in Sacramento, Oakland, and the East Bay, San Jose, and Turlock Modesto. You can imagine those are 4 very different communities in Northern California. Our resettlement program includes housing assistance, benefits enrollment, cultural orientation, and case management for a period of 90 days after arrival. We also provide job readiness training, job placement services, English as a second language classes, careers development services, and one-on-one financial coaching. We have health and wellness programs, including support groups for refugee women and specialized services for domestic violence survivors, human trafficking survivors, and victims of other crimes. We also have programs in food security and nutrition and education. We offer immigration services to include consultations, family reunifications, naturalizations, and removal and deportation defense. IRC has been serving refugees in Northern California since the 1970s, when the first arrivals came from Vietnam. Since then, we have welcomed Central Americans, Eritreans, Ethiopians, Iraqis, and a majority of Afghans. IRC Northern California has successfully resettled more than 65,000 refugees, asylees, and other immigrants from over 50 countries. We have resettled more than 1,100 Ukrainians since 2001, most of them in the Sacramento area. Most Ukrainians have arrived to the Lautenberg program, which provides a refugee resettlement pathway for religious minorities from the former Soviet Union and Iran. At this time, we expect most Ukrainian refugees will want to stay in the EU, where they may have family and have large communities, in the hope that they can return home soon. But at the same time, some may wish to resettle in the United States temporarily or permanently, especially those with family here. At this point, I want to note that the IRC implores the U.S. government that any decisions about Ukrainian refugees must consider the impact on other refugees who have been waiting resettlement for several years. We must provide viable pathways to safety for all fleeing harm. Currently, hundreds of Ukrainians are arriving per week in Northern California with immediate needs such as shelter, housing supplies, transportation, clothes, food, hygiene, medical assistance, and logistical support on information on available resources. There are approximately 1.1 million Slavic residents in Northern California, of which about 300,000 are located in the greater Sacramento area and 800,000 throughout the Bay Area. Local communities of Sacramento have already organized a response to the Ukrainians crossing the US-Mexico border by partnering with churches to provide permanent shelters, food, and clothing. In the past 3 weeks alone, approximately 3,000 Ukrainians arrived in Sacramento, and churches are anticipating an additional 8,000 in the next months. Most are women and children that have suffered tremendous amount of trauma, witnessing war and separation from the loved ones. Appropriate emotional support and medical response are needed. There are increasing numbers of sexually assaulted females. The numbers of undocumented orphans are increasing as families who are not able to flee send their children with other adults to cross to the US. So Ukrainians in Poland and other countries simply message on social media, unknown person, and ask to pay for their tickets to arrive to the US, not knowing who is responding on another end, which makes them an easy target for fraud, human trafficking, sexual assault, and other crimes. So we have challenges. Northern California, as you know, has a housing shortage. Rents continue to rise in our cities. We are still processing a lot of Afghan arrivals, and we still have more to come this fiscal year. We are also processing refugee arrivals from other countries, Syria, Yemen, Eritrea, El Salvador, due to the backlog resulting from the previous Trump administration. If you recall, the refugee resettlement was almost decimated during the Trump administration. So we at the IRC, we're grateful for the opportunity to serve these displaced from Ukraine and support them in rebuilding their lives. So thank you for helping us bringing them from harm to home. Thank you very much.
Brent.
Hi. Thank you so much, Michael, and also Michael from IRC. Thank you for setting the stage for what I believe is an important background to what I'm going to be discussing. So I wanted to share this morning, first introduce myself. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the Director of Legal Services with Jewish Family and Children's Services, and I'm going to be speaking with you this morning about the ways in which JFCS is assisting Ukrainian arrivals and give you a little bit more of an update on the current immigration options for Ukrainians. So first, to discuss a little bit about how JFCS is helping. We are currently collecting monetary donations for our partners who are providing direct support and aid in Europe. We are providing free immigration consultations for any person who is affected by this crisis in Ukraine. We are helping to file immigration applications, including family petitions, TPS applications, potentially asylum applications, as well as the new Uniting for Ukraine applications, expedite requests, and congressional inquiries for those who are eligible for immigration benefits. We're also helping to coordinate volunteer opportunities for those who are interested in helping us in our efforts to aid the Ukrainian communities and those who are arriving here in the US. And finally, for those arriving families, we are providing aid in whatever ways that we can, including case management services. Now, my colleague Michael from IRC did mention the Uniting for Ukraine program. So I want to briefly give an overview of this program. It's a fairly recent development. This program was announced a few weeks ago and then officially launched on April 25th of 2022. It enables Ukrainians abroad to get travel authorization to come to the US and remain here temporarily for up to 2 years. This does require a sponsor to file an affidavit of support online through USCIS's website. However, the sponsor does not need to be a family member. In fact, in many cases, this program allows sponsors to even be representatives of organizations. The sponsors do need to show proof of income and assets in order to be eligible for this program. And once someone is approved, they will be allowed to travel here to the US and to be paroled in for 2 years. And once they are paroled in, they will be eligible to apply for work authorization on entry. It's an important note to say that people will not be granted work authorization on parole into this country. So there will need to be an additional step. And that is a place where many of the immigration service providers like ourselves will be helping those new arrivals to apply for work authorization. Also, I wanted to talk briefly about temporary protected status. This was announced by the administration on around early May or early March of this year. And unfortunately, the applications have not been allowed to be accepted until very recently, April 19th of this year. This program, Temporary Protected Status and the Designation for Ukraine, allows those who have arrived on or before April 11th of this year, who are Ukrainian nationals, to apply for temporary status here in the US to remain until October 19th of next year. So 18 months of temporary status. While here, those who are on TPS can receive work authorization. And unfortunately, up to this date, there is no guarantee of an extension of status. There are other countries in the past that have been designated for TPS, whose designations have been extended, but there is no guarantee at this point that this status will be extended past October of next year. Finally, I did want to address the issues at our southern border. The federal government has been heavily discouraging entry at the US-Mexico border of any new arrivals. However, Ukrainians have been presenting themselves at our southern border, and many have been paroled in through humanitarian parole and received 1 year of temporary status. Those parolees, similar to those who are here through the Uniting for Ukraine program or TPS, can apply for work authorization. However, similar to Uniting for Ukraine and TPS, there is no assumption of an extension of this status. And during this time that someone is paroled into the country, they can explore other methods for remaining permanently, including asylum, and also if they have family members here, adjustment of status through a family member. So in order to address this crisis, there are going to be short and long-term priorities. In the short term, we are sending money and aid to organizations on the ground to provide aid where it's needed. Also, trying to assist people as much as possible to get to safety in EU countries, as well as, if that is not possible, at least safety within safer parts of Ukraine. And then as the federal administration has turned its eyes towards this, expediting relative reunification, the existing refugee processes of the Refugee Admissions Program, as well as the Lautenberg Amendment, and then also this new program, Uniting for Ukraine, which is being presented as a fast track to allow Ukrainian nationals to travel to the United States. In the long term, we are looking to reunite Ukrainian families and help those that are here in the US to obtain permanent status, if it is possible, as well as resettling Ukrainians here in the US and integrating them into American society. I think that this will be, again, a goal that is going to stretch out over the long term, but we are here to support in whatever ways we can. So I wanted to sort of end by asking how you can help. We are asking those who are wishing to provide aid to donate to JFCS and our partners to support our efforts in the Bay Area and abroad. Also, for those who are interested, we do want to encourage people to volunteer with JFCS to provide support for Ukrainians and their loved ones. We especially need help for those who are in the legal field, as we will be meeting a great demand for immigration services over the coming months and years. And finally, I do want to mention that if you have any questions about how to help someone, either someone who is abroad or someone who is here in the US who has recently arrived, please do reach out to our organization. I have my information on this next slide, and we're always here as a resource to provide guidance. And even if you are just looking for ways to help, you can always reach me at my email address or my phone number. I do want to add on a personal note, echoing a little bit of what Dr. Friedman mentioned at the outset, that this is striking a sort of a personal chord for myself. My family's ancestors on my mother's side are from Western Ukraine and Odessa. And there, my ancestors left Ukraine a little bit over 100 years ago to find better opportunities and to flee persecution. And so in these moments, we are helping as much as we can to ease the hardships as people find their ways to a better place, whether it is in Europe or here in the US. And so the work that we're doing is very important to make sure that those families are able to find the help they need. Thank you.
Just a reminder that we will be sending this recording link out by day's end to our 5,600 e-subscribers, along with the slide decks that have been presented and any other important links to resources and how you can help. Darcy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. I want to thank you for hosting this amazing event, and to the San Francisco Interfaith Council for inviting me here today. I feel lucky to go last. I feel like that Michael and Brett, you know, they really did the hard work. They laid the groundwork around the critical situation in Ukraine and the surrounding countries, the incredible work that IRC is doing, and the amazing work that JCFS San Francisco is doing on the ground, in addition to describing the complexities of what U.S. resettlement may look like and what Ukrainians may need, particularly as we learn more about the administration's new Uniting for Ukraine program. I am going to talk about the Jewish Federation system nationally, what we've been doing in terms of philanthropy and advocacy, what our action steps are, and also our role in U.S. resettlement and engaging the Jewish and broader communities in supporting Ukrainians coming into our shores. Let me just, there we go. Okay. So I'm Managing Director of Public Affairs for the Jewish Federations of North America. We are, let me just get there. Sorry, bear with me with the small screen. So we are an umbrella organization representing 146 independent local Jewish federations and 300 independent Jewish communities across North America, including the Jewish Community Federation and Endowment Fund of San Francisco. And these federations are local philanthropies that raise funds to support and engage thousands of affiliated human service, educational, and other partner agencies, including JFCS and JEVS San Francisco, as well as the Jewish Community Relations Council of San Francisco. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with and work very closely with these organizations, and we're proud to work with them as well. And so our network encompasses a philanthropic network and constituency as diverse as any in America. And together we're committed to building and supporting healthy, safe, and caring communities. And collectively we raise and distribute more than $2 billion and leverage much more than that in government funding to serve people of all faiths and backgrounds, regardless of need. Including our network are 150 Jewish family service agencies, and we work very closely with the network of Jewish human service agencies to support those agencies, many of which are official resettlement sites who have been resettling for years and are now looking to engage in the new Uniting for Ukraine program, as well as serving the Ukrainians that are already walking through their doors. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And so the federation system is really built for times like this. We mobilized on day one of the Russian invasion. On day two, we launched an emergency philanthropic campaign, and we have raised $55 million nationally since February 25th. We have allocated $48 million to a variety of organizations working on the ground in Ukraine, working in Romania and Poland and Moldova and other countries to provide for the direct service needs that Ukrainians fleeing Ukraine are seeking, and sharing other funds to help with resettlement in a variety of areas. This slide describe some of the ways that our funding has been allocated for trauma relief, for temporary housing, for transportation, et cetera. And so we've been extraordinarily proud to be able to raise and allocate these funds. But I'm going to talk to you mostly about advocacy. That's my bailiwick. And so this quick timeline gives a little overview about what we've been doing. And I'm proud to say that a lot of what we do, when we have our strength through our interfaith and our relationships and our coalition building. And that's really how we move the needle forward on critical public policy. So on February 25th, of course, 4th, we all know was the date of the invasion. And on February 25th, we joined together with 177 national, local, interfaith, faith organizations to urge the Biden administration to provide temporary protected status to Ukrainians already residing in the United States. And as you know, on March 3rd, they granted that status and have since extended the time period for which Ukrainians can be eligible. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but we then mobilized to do an in-person fly-in Washington, D.C. Right at the crux of the appropriations process. We met with congressional leadership to urge them to extend the Lautenberg Amendment that I know was explained earlier today, and also provide a significant amount of humanitarian relief for the war in Ukraine. We met with the Ukrainian ambassador, we met with the State Department. It was honestly a privilege to be able to have those meetings and those conversations at that critical point. And as you know, that funding was allocated and the Lautenberg program was extended. The next ask began to be opening our doors to entitle Ukrainians with family in the US to come to the United States to reunite with their family and to wait here in safety while their cases were processing. We mobilized a national letter to the Biden administration with 376 organizations, local and national, faith and non-faith, signing on, urging the administration to begin to welcome in Ukrainians. I spoke directly with the White House, who said that this letter showed the immense support showed by our coalition was really significant. And shortly following that was when President Biden made his announcement that 100,000 Ukrainians would be welcomed into the U.S. We work closely with our partners like HIAS and IRC and others who are also leading the charge nationally in advocating on these issues. And to be able to demonstrate broad coalition really makes a difference to really amplify the community's voice. So the timeline, I skipped Uniting for Ukraine, which my colleagues have described in detail. And so we're analyzing and mobilizing. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as far as Capitol Hill goes, just last Thursday, President Biden issued a supplemental Ukraine aid request to Congress, which is the largest amount of funding that the president has requested at this point in the war. Largely due to the significant amount of funds that requested for defense. It's over $22 billion for defense. But this package includes economic aid to Ukraine to be able for the Ukrainian government to provide critical services to Ukrainian civilians who are still there. The package also includes over $3 billion for humanitarian aid, including, noted on the slide, $1.2 billion to the Department of Health and Human Services that will be administered through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, specifically for workforce training, for trauma-informed care, for funds that will go to states to help enroll additional students, because Ukrainian students will be coming here to be enrolled in school. The fund also includes $150 million to the State Department that will help with overseas refugee assistance. So this package provides significant funding, certainly not enough, but it makes a significant statement in terms of the US's commitment to resettle Ukrainians, and also would authorize, critically, that it would authorize the Ukrainians coming over with the humanitarian parole status as described by Michael and Brett through Uniting for Ukraine. It would entitle them to some sort of federal assistance. And that federal assistance is critical to the Jewish Family Service and other resettlement agencies that are going to be providing support to the Ukrainians coming to America. So our key advocacy ask at this point is to pass the supplemental Ukraine aid package as quickly as possible. We all know about roadblocks on Capitol Hill, and there's a lot of discussion about tacking on additional pieces of legislation or additional financial asks like a COVID relief package to the bill. And we agree that all of those other items are also critical, but we want to make sure that this package is passed as quickly as possible, that we have a bipartisan agreement to appropriate these funds during this critical time of need. We are going to be working on a Dear Colleague letter with members of Congress that will certainly be needing support to help your local members sign on, and I will share that with you when it's available. But the time is now, as negotiations begin in the Senate and we'll move to the House next week, that we pass this bill. So quickly, I know we've already been through Uniting for Ukraine. I'm not gonna go through it, and we've been through Lautenberg. The last piece that I wanted to mention, and I know we're getting short on time, is that we're working closely to mobilize our network of Jewish Family Service agencies, our Jewish federations, our synagogues, et cetera, to engage them in ways to provide wraparound services for the Ukrainians that will be coming over on sponsorship, acknowledging that they'll have a variety of needs as detailed by Brett. So we're working closely to partner with our faith partners locally, but at the national level, providing a lot of engagement and volunteer opportunities. Last, I'd encourage you to visit our website. We have a special Ukraine page with a lot of opportunities for Russian-speaking volunteers to go to Eastern Europe to provide services on the ground, for ways to give, although I encourage you to give locally, of course. And last, we have FAQs on many of the resettlement processes that were addressed this morning. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Darcy, and thank you to Michael and Brett. This was truly a well-rounded and comprehensive presentation. We've asked Gia Daniler, who I've worked with for a number of years, to be a respondent to your presentations and to pose some questions to you. Gia has faithfully represented Jewish Family Children's Services on something that we call the Faith-Based Social Service Agencies CEO Roundtable that the Interfaith Council has been convening since 2008, at the time of the recession. Gia, I want to thank you also for helping us to choreograph putting this wonderful panel together. I'm going to hand the floor over to you and be the respondent, be the person who poses the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to all of the presenters today. It is wonderful to partner with the San Francisco Interfaith Coalition in this way, and I love participating on the behalf of Dr. Anita Friedman and JFCS in all the work that you do. So I want to let folks know that should you have questions, people who are listening in and joining us today online, please put them, direct them in the chat to Q&A, and we will get to as many questions as we can. We'll have maybe the next 15 to 20-ish minutes, depending on how many questions come in. So there, I am starting to get some, and there are a wide range of topics that are of interest. I'm going to ask something that hasn't yet come up in this conversation, that one or more of you might know something about. And we have a question here asking about the plight of Russian citizens who are opposed to Putin's actions and whether or not anything is being considered. There's the questioner notes that men in Russia from age 16 to 60 are being forced to fight against their will and under the threat of imprisonment. And we know the statements that have been made about we will expel people who don't, who don't agree with Mother Russia. So any Brad or any of you, any thoughts on this? Any conversations about if those folks show up at the border or filing petitions?
Hi, Gia. So I'll start. We have had a number of consultations with Russian emigres who have fled in the last few months. And the answer is that there are options. Asylum is sort of the key option that someone would be looking for if they are fearing persecution based on their political beliefs. It is unclear, I think, at this point to me, what the current federal administration's position is on aiding Russian nationals. And I think I will leave it to Michael and to Darcy to see if they can provide any more insight.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, we have no guidance yet about differentiating. What we do know, at least in IRC Sacramento, we have a couple of caseworkers who were detailed, who are Ukrainian and Russian speakers. And so they're the ones who are providing the case, initial case management. But right now it's still ever evolving and we're waiting for guidance.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Brett, I think you covered it. Just to add that, agree that I believe that that they would be claiming asylum as a pathway right now. I know that many have already come over the southern border. And as Michael says, that the guidance is currently changing, and I'm sure we'll know more as things move ahead.
Okay. There have also been questions over reports that while these large numbers of refugees are for the most part being welcomed with open arms in Poland and the other neighboring countries, there are various reports about some people of color, people who perhaps aren't ethnic Ukrainians, being treated differently. What do you know about this, to the extent that it is or isn't accurate, reasons, ways to prevent that from happening, whether it's leaving you at the point of leaving Ukraine and going to a bordering country, or is there any differentiation taking place at our border, even though folks, as Brett said, are being told not to come? We know that folks are presenting at the southern border. Did that question make sense? Okay, I'm going to direct that. Michael, have you been hearing, has IRC been dealing with this of unequal treatment?
Yes, it is. We are still navigating that. Our stance, of course, is equity and empathy, whether it's on the policy level or or in case management. My colleagues in IRC San Diego, we have a robust border program there, which has been working on nationals from El Salvador, from Central America and Mexico. They are facing that, but we do not have, we have no reports or no anecdotes yet of such treatment outside of what we hear. In terms of Europe, in Poland, or I have no additional information outside of what you have in the media.
Yes. Darcy, is there anything, because what my understanding is that there were non-Ukrainians in Ukraine who maybe were immigrants from Syria or North Africa or other war-torn parts of the world, and they may not be having as easy a time being in how they're being welcomed and served in places like Poland. I don't know if that's true, but that's the concern and the question. And I'll just put it out there one more time, and then we could move on.
I don't know about the processing and how they're being. I mean, I'm sure you read whatever you read in the press. I don't have any additional details, although I do know that one of the key asks from our partner HIAS and other national resettlement organizations is that individuals that were in Ukraine who had fled from other countries, that they also that their asylum claims also be prioritized by the US.
Okay. So sticking a moment with the advocacy, piece then, you talked about the Uniting for the Ukraine program, which I want to get more into in a moment, and the fact that folks will be granted humanitarian parole for this period of up to 2 years. Can you explain, and I think either and any one of you could do this, the difference between that and when you come through as a refugee, and why it's my understanding that folks like all of the national organizations, and I know that JFNA works closely, and perhaps IRC and others, with the highest Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and they keep talking about how it would be preferable for people to come through the refugee program. The administration has decided to do this differently. And I guess my question is that sort of a foregone conclusion, and now it's time to just focus on the resources on the advocacy front to make things as successful as possible? Or is there still an effort to, down the road, expand it all? And can you explain the difference in the program and why, the pluses and minuses, I guess?
I can jump in unless Michael. So, so with the formal refugee resettlement program, a person comes over and they are, just to summarize it, entitled to a series of funds, cash assistance from the federal government. They're entitled to support from a resettlement agency, and they're entitled to apply for federal and state benefits. And in turn, the resettlement agency gets some funding from the federal government to provide services and resettle that person. The theory behind the humanitarian parole program, that is the Uniting for Ukraine program, is that Ukrainians are coming here temporarily, that they will want to return back to Ukraine when the war is over. So the predicate of this program is that a sponsor must be able to vouch that they can financially assist a beneficiary for 2 years, up to 2 years. So that's assuming that the person goes back. So the theory around this program does not build in funds or benefits to allow the Ukrainian beneficiary to really to settle here permanently, right? And so the distinction is that when one comes to the US on humanitarian parole, like the Afghans did when they were evacuated at the end of the summer, that they're not given any benefits, and the resettlement agencies are not given any federal financial support to provide services to them. Now, the Afghans, due to an act of Congress, were then awarded eligibility for benefits. Similarly, the supplemental funding request that I described from the Biden administration does include some benefits for the Ukrainian parolees. It also includes a status adjustment for the Afghans. So that's a different story. But so that's the key difference, is that they're not coming with the framework that they would really need to settle here.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gia, I just wanted to add, in addition, and I think Darcy mentioned this, but I want to highlight it, is that one of the main differences is that there is no pathway to permanent residence or citizenship through this Uniting for Ukraine program. It is temporary status, and there are some individuals who will be able to adjust to permanent status through either asylum or through family members. But unlike the refugee admissions program, which allows a very clear pathway to permanent status, this is not it. It's only intended for this 2-year temporary stay.
Okay. So let's get into the United for Ukraine program in a little bit more detail. You described it, Brett. If somebody is considering wanting to sponsor an individual or a family to come, as the program is set up to, is designed to do, what should they consider? What should they be prepared to be responsible for? And because it strikes me that are going to be a lot of individuals, and maybe there are, churches and synagogues. You already talked about this being done, Michael, in Sacramento for folks coming across the southern border to date. But what should people think about? And then the second part is, how do you anticipate organizations like JFCS, like the other resettlement agencies and IRC, what will that relationship look like to support individual people like any of us who say, I want to step up and help bring someone over, etc.
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. This program is very new, and so I think that it's only about a week and a half old, and I think that for those of us like me who are providing these sort of direct immigration services, we are still understanding the contours. I will say generally, sponsors or people who have wanted to be sponsors through this program, one of their main questions is, will I be required to provide health insurance? And I think that is also a main question that we have, both as sort of through an advocacy route, as well as for state and local providers, which is, I think that, as Darcy has said, those who arrive through this program will likely not be eligible for many federal benefits at all. And, at least until we get more guidance from the federal government, Medicaid will likely not be available to most people who are arriving here through this program. And so one of the big questions is, will I have to pay for health insurance for these individuals for 2 years? And I think that one of the things answering their questions is, what are my obligations as the sponsor? And there is a requirement that the sponsor be able to show a certain amount of sort of level of income or level of assets in order to support someone for these 2 years. But it sort of remains an open question whether the state or local governments or even the federal government will step in and provide any aid in this arena. So it is something that we're continuing to look at. And then in terms of your second part of your question about how our organizations will sort of play a part in supporting sponsors or providing services to them, I think that it does also depend a lot on how our state and local governments are going to be able to respond to provide aid. We need to know what is available in our communities, and then we will help to fill in the gaps.
Do any of you expect to perhaps, as more information becomes available and you have more time to think this through, to have any workshops on this, a webinar on this? I see a future Interfaith Council event perhaps over time, but putting it out there if that's something that people might look out for in coming weeks and months. Okay, I see you nodding your head. I'll take that as a yes.
Definitely, through the either through the resettlement program or through a special TPS program similar to that is parallel similar to the Afghan arrivals. We're also waiting to hear from that at the IRC, both in Sacramento and nationwide.
Okay, Michael, how much more time do we have?
I think we have time for one last question.
Okay. So, well, I want to be sure to ask the question of how can people help? And I want to invite all of the panelists to also use the chat. I think you can post in everyone if you want to share your contact information or information on your organizations that people can click and learn more. So I want to put that question out there, but I'm also going to ask sort of one more substance question on. You've talked, Brett just hit on the role that local and state organizations or the government and resources, access to programs, that's going to be a piece of this. So what other policy issues for advocacy purposes, because most of us who are on this call participate in one way or another on the public policy front and the advocacy front. Is there anything else that you want to call out? And I was really, and I'll just say that I was really concerned to hear about this issue of the unaccompanied minors and sexual assault. I understood that to mean it's issues in their transit, not just what's happening in the ground in Ukraine and in bordering nations at this point. So, you know, whether it's on that issue or anything that we've discussed, any policy that you want to put out there for folks to be thinking about engaging on. And then the how to help. Darcy, I think you're muted, but if maybe each of you just wants to chime in for a minute or two before we close, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and thanks, Gia, and thank you again for this opportunity. I know we're closing to share our work with you and our urgent advocacy asks, and it's just been a pleasure to hear from Michael and Brett and hear about the work happening locally as well. That, you know, we would urge you to reach out to your senators and your local House delegation to urge them to pass the supplemental appropriations bill as quickly as possible. And then there's going to be continued asks. This war continues. It's having ramifications around the globe. I know there's a significant food insecurity issue raised now due to the disruption of food supply chains because Russia and Ukraine are significant producers of wheat and corn. I mean, there's so much here. But the top ask is to pass this supplemental, and then we can look forward to the future needs.
For my part at the IRC, in addition to the links that I've shared in the chat of how to donate and how to support, I think we're entering into a phase wherein we will need to increase our legal services, very much like Brett's work. We are seeing a scale that we've not seen before. We're going through a scale that we've not seen before. Again, as I mentioned, we have our Afghan arrivals, and if we're expecting our Ukrainian arrivals, we only have 3-4 attorneys, as well as a dozen legal representatives. But the scale, we're just bracing ourselves to the scale. So I guess the ask is, for law firms and pro bono work out there, please contact me, and I will as we build our legal services program.
And I will just add to that, just echoing what my colleagues had mentioned, that, you know, we will be seeing, you know, we will be addressing this problem for years, and certainly in the coming months, we will need all the support that we can. So I would just ask that, you know, if you are able and willing to donate to JFCS so that we can continue our legal services direct service work. And then also we are looking for attorneys, especially immigration attorneys or those who are in the legal field. We will be doing trainings to sort of help lay people and also attorneys to fill out basic forms, including work authorization forms and fee waivers, which will be very important for incoming parolees. So I put my information in the chat, and I hope that we're able to get your support.
Right. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Michael, for this opportunity.
Gia, thank you for your very capable moderating skills and posing these questions. Thank you so much to our three panelists, Michael and Darcy and Brett, and of course to our wonderful Dr. Anita Friedman. This brings our program to a close today. I also want to thank Cynthia Zambucas, the Administrative Program Associate at the Interfaith Council, for all the work that she does, as well as Trey Russell Allen, our tech consultant. We would invite you to join us this time next week when the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency will be presenting on phase 2 of the Geary Rapid Transit Project. It's very important. They're seeking public input. So they are basically going to be hosting a public forum on what the plans are and are looking for some input. Once again, thank you for being with us. This brings to a close today's program. God bless you and God keep you.